Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the patch 11.1 is prepping our classes for an exciting new Season 2 set of content updates for the War Within expansion, from dungeons, raids, delves, but also within PvP content as well. Not only are we getting a bunch of new class changes, but also PvP specific talents, a whole new slew of them with a bunch of new additions and a lot of really insane combinations that I don't even know how many of those are actually going to leave the PTR and make it over into the live realms, because for some reason they decided to outfit every one of our classes with the most broken abilities out there, buffing the damage, buffing the defenses, providing new abilities. And now some of our classes are doing things they never could before, from druids becoming massive trees to monks that can cast while moving, death knights which are a howling death that's imminent if you never walk away from them. There's so many busted new combinations out there, and I really wanted to take a closer look at every single new PvP talent that's arriving in the patch 11.1 right now, ready for testing on the PTR. As always, if you guys want to see more 11.1 PTR updates in the future, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's take a look at all of these new talents. Now, for the most part, I am going to focus on all of the new PvP talents being added, or redesigns for some of them for 11.1. There is a number of changes and even some nerfs, and the list of PvP specific changes is likely going to grow over the next few weeks as we get more PTR builds. So I will have the actual link for the notes that I'm using linked in the description if you want to get a full detailed list for all the nerfs and all the different changes, but I will primarily focus on all of the new and exciting stuff, starting with a spec of Frost Death Knight. Frost Death Knights are getting a new talent called Death's Cold Embrace. Pillar of Frost now grants you Remorseless Winter and increases its damage by 1000% and its radius by 150%, but your movement speed is heavily reduced during this duration. Pillar of Frost cooldown is also supposed to be increased by 15 seconds, so we should put it back down to a minute cooldown if using other CDR talents like Ice Cap. And this PvP talent seems very strong. It still gives you full access of all of your basic combat abilities, but now you just get this much more powerful version of Remorseless Winter every time you press Pillar of Frost. So not only are you still able to do your full rotation, your movement speed is heavily reduced because of this though, but you also are dealing ton of AoE damage, up to 1,000,000 DPS to all other nearby enemies with that ability. It's a very powerful skill that can hit very hard, but it does have a big drawback of granting you basically no movement speed at all. A very interesting change, and one that Shield Pills in particular, someone that joins our 5-5 duel series fairly regularly, thinks this talent is most likely gonna get nerfed before it releases to the live realms, but it's definitely a very interesting take at a Frost Death Knight, being this cold, deathly embrace that slowly approaches you, almost like in one of those horror flick zombie movies, or like getting chased by Jason or something like that, like slow creeping death that is inevitable, and that is what Frost Death Knights are likely going to become. Havoc Demon Hunters are getting the talent of Illidan's Grasp, which replaces your Fell Eruption. On a meta cooldown, you get to strangle the target with demonic magic, stunning them in place while dealing shadow damage over 5 seconds while the target is grasped. You can also then use this ability again while channeling to then hurl the target to a location within 20 yards, tossing them away. So it grants you a little bit more control in more ways than one, but it does replace your main stunning ability, and it's the same skill that is available to Vengeance Demon Hunters, but now given to Havoc Demon Hunters, that allows you to fully control an enemy and then toss them away in case if you need to, which can give you a little bit more repositional abilities as well. Though with the way that it functions, the channel, you would want to hold on to it for as long as possible and then try to toss the enemy to an unfavorable position towards the tail end of that channel. But like you saw with me here, it is very possible to try to land that toss at the end, but quite miss it just by a hair while still trying to maximize its full damage, which should give Havoc Demon Hunters a little bit extra control, and this could be really strong in PvP when it comes to just throwing an enemy in a bad position, maybe to make sure that they'll line assigning your healer, or throw them into other crowd control effects like maybe a Hunter Freezing Trap or any of the other class effects. Now, as we go through all of these different abilities, you'll notice that not every single class gets brand new stuff and very exciting things. Sometimes they're just getting some adjustments to existing talent, or maybe additional talents that they previously didn't have, but they do have it if they just switch to another spec of that same class. Now, not every class can be like a druid that's got some very exciting stuff, like a brand new form of a tree called Ancient of Lore. This replaces your Tree of Life with a much bigger, more modified, and a stronger version of Tree of Life, becoming an Ancient of Lore, preventing all CC effects on you for 12 seconds, while also reducing damage taken by 20%. Replacing your entire set of abilities with all your Moonfires, Sunfires, all of your Hearts, Rejuves, Regrows, everything with 2 abilities, a Blossom Burst and Mass Blooming. With Mass Blooming, you get to heal 5 allies for a bunch of healing and apply a missing healing over time effect on those allies. With Blossom Burst, you get to heal a singular ally for a ton while applying a missing heart from them. If, let's say, you use Blossom Burst and they have all healing over time effects present, then Blossom Burst is guaranteed to critically strike. And this changes your whole form entirely. Like, you get this massive Tree of Life form after a quick cast. And this is your form. You can move very, very slowly, but for the most part, you're there just to stand still and spam out healing. You get to apply a bunch of hearts to everybody in your team, and then spam as much healing as possible while you have this full-on immunity. This is a really cool talent. Not only does it actually change the way that you play as a druid, which to me personally, I think is very, very exciting, but the fact that you can just go with this massive healing output while immune to CC, it gives you like a very, very powerful way to either pop a defensive or pop massive healing to an ally. And it's a very interesting talent overall. I'm a huge, huge fan of it overall. Another PvP talent you have as a wrestler is Forest Guardian. Wrestler druids get the benefit of being able to apply Hot on an ally, and once you have all those healing effects rolling all at once, you can then actually play a little bit more aggressive. You already have all the Hots rolling, there's not much you need to do. They're already getting healed, so you can do a little bit of damage or maybe land a couple of CC, help out the team and try to play a little bit more aggressively at times, which is the benefit of playing a druid. And these hybrid benefits are exemplified with the Forest Guardian, which doesn't fully function right now, but when it does, your abilities like Wrath, Starfire, Cyclone, as well as combo generate abilities in cat form will extend the duration of an active heal over time effect by a second and up to 3 allies. So if, let's say, you want to load up an ally full of Hots and then get in there to try to help them score a kill, building those combo points will actually extend those Hots. Right now it doesn't quite work at the moment, but the idea behind it is there though. Like, it allows you to play a little bit more aggressively, landing Cyclones, casting Wrath, building combo points in cat form. Also, when you use certain abilities like combo point spending abilities like Bite or Rip in cat form, or Star Surge if you're playing like a caster build, you increase the rate of your heal over time effects by 20% for 4 seconds, which also could be very, very strong. It basically allows wrestlers to play super hyper aggressive, while also allowing the Hots to benefit from it as well. So it's a new way for you to potentially get super aggressive, maybe even play with some talents like super aggressive ones like Call the Elder Druid, Dream of Scenarios, maybe there's Heart of the Wild, especially with some of the new changes that the rest of the druids are getting in 11.1. This could open up a new opportunity for them to get even more aggressive than ever before. Now, the next class is going to be the Evoker with the talent of Seismic Slam. Normally an augmentation talent, now becoming a PvP talent for all 3 specs of the Evoker. It does allow Landslide to cause enemies that are mid-air to be slammed back to the ground, stunning them for 4 seconds, with Landslide cooldown reduced to 15 seconds. That being said, I thought initially that if you, let's say, play an Preservation or Devastation Evoker, you might be able to land a quick tail swipe into a Landslide, but it doesn't look like that will be enough because you don't get launched high enough in the air, because like Landslide or tail swipe, and by the time that I get the GCDs to use Landslide again, I wouldn't have been able to stun them. I tried that earlier, it didn't work. So this one may have some potential value if, let's say, you're playing this with another class that has a knock-up as a Devastation or Preservation, but this still does seem like a augmentation only stun, mostly because tail swipe incurs so long of a GCD for you to be able to tail swipe into a Landslide reliably. Up next, we have the class of Hunter, where they're getting a number of changes, either spec-specific but also generic changes as well. One of those generic talents is going to be Explosive Powder. Bursting Shot, which is a class talent available for all 3 specs, will now also knock you back while also knocking the enemy back, and will snare the enemies by an additional 20%. So if you're looking to use Bursting Shot more as a defensive tool rather than a positional tool to knock an enemy in a specific spot, you now can, as it will send you flying like a second disengage, which could be very, very strong when it comes to adding additional mobility. Besides this, Beastmaster Hunter gains a new version of Dire Beast Basilisk. Dire Beast Basilisk isn't getting a lot of play. It's generally very, very slow, but also kind of unwieldy to use. They are baking it as part of your Call of the Wild ability to additionally summon a slow-moving Basilisk, so that may make it a little bit better. I doubt it though, because the Basilisk is decent all on its own whenever you can reach a target, but it is so incredibly slow that in most cases you're not going to be able to use it effectively. The Basilisk takes a second for it to really adjust and reposition. But at least they are trying to make it a little bit better. By combining Basilisk as part of another cooldown does make it a little bit more usable. Not by much, but does make it a little bit better. For Marksmanship Hunter, you do get a nice new set of talents, one of them being Sniper's Advantage. Marksmanship has had this like lone wolf sniper aesthetic behind it, with many players enjoying the extra range that you get thanks to your mastery of sniper training, which not only increases the damage of all abilities, but also increases the range of those abilities by, depending on mastery, from me right now it's 16.9%, which allows my abilities to have a 48-yard range. Currently, right now, this is my actual max range for abilities, but with sniper training during true shot and volley, it increases the range of all shots by 30% during the ability's duration. So if I press something like true shot, it actually increases the range of my abilities by 61 yards, which means that I can now be this far away and still strike my enemies from super far away. This could be very, very strong when it comes to BGs, particularly in Blitz with certain maps, where you can literally outrange enemies when they can't hit you, but you can hit them. Definitely going to be a very, very fun talent to experiment with, especially in random battlegrounds, but I think this could definitely have some value even when it comes to certain competitive environments. Another talent that hunters are getting is Aspect of the Fox. The Warlord's Regener buff that kind of was added during the expansion and removed, it is kind of sort of coming back this time around. Aim shot may now be cast during Aspect of the Cheetah, and Aspect of the Cheetah's delayed effect is now increased by 4 seconds, which means that playing around heavy into Aspect of the Cheetah and the mobility and the increased duration does give you the ability to now cast aim shot while on the move, which is huge. This is a massive mobility increase, but also further will help augment the damage of a Marksmanship Hunter, because you no longer now have to stand still in order to get your aim shots up as long as your Aspect of the Cheetah is active. Playing together with other cooldowns to help further reduce Aspect of the Cheetah could actually increase your overall damage as well. This is a really cool talent, and I love what they're doing with Marksmanship, how they're allowing you to mess around with a little bit of that range, but also when it comes to changing the way some of your casted abilities function. The next class that's getting some new PvP talent is the Mage, and we got ourselves a new one that is changing depending on the spec of Mage that you play. But if you play Frost and you play with the Overpowered Barrier, a brand new talent added for 11.1, your barriers absorb 100% more damage, but only last for 5 seconds. If a barrier is fully absorbed, it gains an additional effect. As a Frost Mage, you get Ice Barrier, and if this barrier is fully absorbed, enemies within 10 yards will suffer about 574,000 frost damage and are slowed by 70% for 4 seconds, which is like a very nice anti-melee barrier that gives you a much bigger shield to help absorb 4.2 million damage for 5 seconds. That is massive, and can even allow you to play with certain talents to help you to reduce the cooldown of some of those barriers as well. Maybe accumulating shield won't be that great, but barrier diffusion will actually be quite a bit. Will be able to gain quite a bit of overall value. Frost and Fire Mages are spec into Frostfire spec that play around the talent of Imbued Warding can gain the Blazing Barrier or Ice Barrier of the opposite spec. So as a Frost Mage, you actually get 2 barriers. You get Ice Barrier, full value for that, but with Blazing Barrier, it also has the shield lasts for only 5 seconds, but it now reflects 100% of the damage absorbed. So not only can you have a very beefy shield that absorbs a ton of damage, but also causes the enemies to take additional damage from just you pressing your defensives buttons. Though for the spec of Arcane Mage, that barrier gone through a number of changes already over on the PTR. Initially, the barrier read, and this was the actual blue post for this, if the barrier is fully absorbed, you then gain time warp for 4 seconds. Looks like that was not that strong and not that worth, so they changed it so far over in the PTR, and I wonder if they have a different version of this internally as well, because there's a public testing realm that we all get to test out, but then there's an internal realm that's gotten a flurry of new changes apparently as of recently. However, the new prismatic barrier, if this barrier is fully absorbed, your next blink or shimmer within 15 seconds will grant you invisibility and immunity to damage for 3 seconds. So it's kind of like a defensive barrier escape tool So if, let's say, you need to escape instantaneously as a mage, then you could use Overpowered Barrier to grant yourself a shield in order to play defensive. If for some reason that shield breaks, then you can blink, disappear from sight, and then reposition potentially. It is a very strong tool, and I actually think this could be pretty good on its own, especially when mage is looking for a bit more defensive play. Besides this, we also saw a redesign on Ring of Fire, which no longer deals damage. In fact, Ring of Fire basically becomes a different variation of Ring of Frost, so you now require Ring of Frost to be able to play Ring of Fire because they're now one and the same. With the new Ring of Fire, it has a 45-second cooldown with a 1.6-second cast time, where you summon a Ring of Fire for 8 seconds at the target location. Enemies entering the ring are disoriented and burn for only 3% of their total health over 3 seconds instead of 18%. So it's kind of like where Ring of Frost is there to incapacitate enemies, freezing them in place for a second, while the Ring of Fire instead will disorient them, causing them to burn. So it's just a flip side of that one. It's just more of another way for you to crowd control enemies, no longer primarily used as a damaging ability, and it now has more of a defined edges to the actual Ring of Fire. I guess maybe in some situations that could be a little bit better of an ability, but it definitely feels a little bit on the weaker end, especially as Frost Mage, where you could play the zonal build where you drop down Ring of Fire, Ring of Frost, Blizzard, and Orb as enemies are chilling behind the pillar, and then you can just constantly harass them that way. Now you can't really do that, and I guess you'll try to maybe use Ring of Fire as a disorient. Let's say you may have maybe too many ink caps but not enough disorients on your team, and you need a little bit of a crowd control, or if you want to hit multiple targets with it, maybe it could be good defensively, but I think not as good as the original Ring of Fire. Besides this, Fire Mages are getting a new talent called Ignition Burst, where a Heat Shimmer, which they changed recently to just increase the damage of your Scorch to be basically treated as if the target is in an execute window. With Ignition Burst, it allows that Heat Shimmer Scorch to become instant cast and cast at 100% effectiveness to have a little bit more punch to it. Okay, so this is the fully buffed version of Scorch with all the right talents, and it hits for... Okay, that's a little bit more respectable in terms of damage. So if Scorch could somehow hit somebody for 442,000, which is a much better number, then I think that could maybe make it a lot better, but it might be one of those abilities that you kind of bank for and then kind of send in with the rest of your cooldowns together. So you might be looking to fish Scorches and then hopefully get yourself a couple of procs of it back to back, because it does play off of Ignite, so maybe you might want to play into some more that is a bit more heavier on Ignite type of damage. From there we have the spec of Windwalker Monk, and with this spec we have a new talent called Feathered Feet. You may now cast abilities while moving during Lighter Than Air, and its duration is now 6 seconds. Lighter Than Air is a basic class talent where roll causes you to become lighter than air, which allows you to double jump to dash forward, which is a very fun mechanic. Huge fan of using this ability to jump over little gaps. But in PvP, you now may be able to use roll, and now you can cast while moving, and you can cast all of your abilities, but for a limited time. As soon as that move or lighter than air buff expires, you can't cast while moving anymore. So you have a limited window to potentially get a cast off and reposition, but once lighter than air is gone, you can still keep channeling through the mist. This could be possibly better if, let's say, you're trying to find some line of sight, but you want to get yourself a Through the Mist established, so now you can continue that Through the Mist while now sitting behind the pillar. This could give you a little bit more freedom in terms of how you move around, but it does mean that you cannot double jump to consume lighter than air, otherwise you lose that casted while moving buff. But from there, we got the class of Paladin, where we got a number of new talents. Some of them functional, some of them not so much. First one being Luminescence. Luminescence has since been redesigned to work with one of the newer talents of Paladin, Light Bearer, which allows 10% of all healing done to you if you heal up to 4 nearby allies divided among them evenly. So the more healing a Paladin does, that healing radiates from you to heal you all of your allies, which is pretty neat. With the PvP talent of Luminescence, Light Bearer's healing transfer is now increased by up to 200% based on your current health. But the lower the health the Paladin is getting healed, the better healing that's getting reflected to all of your allies. So focusing a Paladin can actually cause that refracted healing to be increased, which may make it pretty good in certain situations, though it only works if another source heals the Paladin. It doesn't work if the Paladin heals themselves. Another PvP talent that right now does not work is Shining Revelation, but it could be very interesting in the future. The light reveals all enemies in stealth or invisible to you while under the effects of Divine Shield, and this effect will linger for 20 seconds after Divine Shield fades. So if let's say there's a stealthy in a vicinity, when you press bubble, no, it does work. It wasn't working the other day, but now you can actually see a stealthy target while Divine Shield is active and for a few seconds after it is gone. So if let's say you're having a hard time catching after a stealthy, maybe like a rogue, try to burst you down, then they vanish as you press bubble. Now that the bubble is gone, you should be able to find that rogue. Having to commit a bubble just to find a stealthy, I think would be very, very difficult. But if you are able to, let's say, respond back to a rogue or counter the damage of that of a rogue after they have a stealthy opener on you, and then they vanish out of sight to reset, now it's going to be much harder for them to catch an easy reset after your bubble has been used. Besides this change though, Disc Priest, I'm going to talk about Disc Priest in a second, but Holy Paladin also gains the blessing of Spell Warding as a PvP talent, which is exactly the same blessing as Spell Warding for Prop Pally, Red Pally, and Holy Pally, providing you the protection of Blessing of Protection, physical damage immunity, but flips that with magic damage immunity instead, which is going to give Holy Paladins even more group support than ever before. Then we got the class of Priest, with Disc Priest getting a big bulk of new changes, primarily to Archangel and Dark Archangel. Both these abilities are now passive instead of an active, and they combine off of existing skills within the talent tree. This talent tree has changed by quite a bit, however, so there's a lot of things for us to go over, though I'm going to save that for another video. I'm primarily focused on the PvP talents. Like Archangel, Evangelism becomes kind of a core skill placed right in the center of Disc Priest in order to make the playstyle be a little bit more favorable, and they are tying Archangel to Evangelism, where Evangelism normally extends the atonements on allies by 6 seconds and heals those allies for a set amount split evenly amongst them, which is not that bad in PvP when you're splitting amongst like 2, 3, maybe if nearby 5 additional allies. But within Archangel allows Evangelism to also increase your healing by 30%, and Evangelism increases your healing and absorption effects by 20. So not only do you have a more potent version of Evangelism that has immediate big time healing, which can be used to single out a heal an ally if they're with an atonement buff, but also increases your healing and absorption by 20% for 15 seconds, so it gives it a much bigger burst window, with the heal potentially becoming a lot more potent, allowing you to really focus down a singular ally, giving you an extra or a more potent healing cooldown while allowing you to utilize Evangelism fully. Dark Archangel does a very similar thing, now functioning off of either your Shadow Fiend or Mindbender, with its damage adjusted. Whenever you summon up a Shadow Fiend or a Mindbender, your damage of all allies with atonement is increased by 10% for 8 seconds. The duration of the buff changes. If you have a Shadow Fiend, it's a 20-second duration of the buff, but with a Shadow Fiend, it's only an 8-second duration, but it does allow your allies to get a fairly decent damage window to work well off of this whole aggressive playstyle the Discipline Priest embodies. Rogues get a new talent of Preemptive Maneuver, which buffs the effectiveness of your Feint. Feint, especially if you play it together with a talent like Elusiveness, it can cause Feint to reduce your damage taken by 20%. From non-AoE area of abilities, which is very strong as a defensive, and with the way that they changed Feint to be off GCD, it does make it a little bit more usable. One of the more satisfying things rogues can do with enough practice and skill is to try to pre-feint a enemy stun. So if let's say you're enemy trying to lock you down, stun you to burst you, if you pre-feint that stun, that can cause your survivability to go through the roof. With Preemptive Maneuver, they're trying to make the survivability guaranteed, where Feint will decrease your damage taken by an additional 40% on top of the 20% while stunned, and its energy cost is also reduced by 30% to give Feint with certain talents like Nimble Fingers a 18 energy cost, which isn't all that much. Most of your rogue abilities cost between 45, 40, 35 energy. Having Feint on an 18 energy cost makes it a lot more usable, and so now if you can pre-feint a stun, then you might be able to get yourself a massive damage reduction out of your rogue. Both Elemental and Restoration Shamans are getting a new talent of Storm Conduit to try to make Storm focus builds and Lightning focus builds just a little bit better for PvP. Casting Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning reduces the cooldown of Astral Shift, your main defensive, Gust of Wind, a big mobility ability, as well as Wind Shear and all nature totems by a second or by 3 seconds if you're Restoration, which means that you'll actually get some defensive cooldown reduction. Earthy totems could be things like your Stone Bulwark totem. If you press Astral Shift and interrupt an enemy, you can see all those abilities go on cooldown, and as I press Lightning Bolt, you actually see a cooldown reduction return on many of those abilities, like for things such as Astral Shift. You can see these abilities that go back just a little bit quicker. Lightning Bolt is a weird ability to pull off in PvP. It is a lot easier to combine it together with things like Stormkeeper, for instance, just so you can get yourself the most amount of damage and value for those Lightning Bolts, making them much easier to cast overall. But they are trying to find ways to make Lightning Bolt Shamans where you have to stand still and cast those bolts or chain lightnings a little bit more effective, and this could potentially be one of those talents that grants you more movement speed with your Gust of Wind ability function off of those Lightning Bolts, more interrupts so you can play aggressively with those Wind Shears, but also potentially more defenses with Astral Shift. This ability and this talent is a lot more powerful for Restoration to try to get him to play more lightning abilities and lightning builds in the future as well, which may make him want to play this. It'll be interesting to see if any Shamans will end up adapting this new PvP talent, but I've always enjoyed the idea of more cooldown reduction on certain key abilities, and I think Storm Conduit provides you a decent bit of that cooldown reduction overall. Up next, we have the class of Warlock, where they're getting a brand new talent, one that's actually very exciting, called Bloodstones. Your Hellstones are replaced with Bloodstones, which increase your user's haste by 30% for 12 seconds instead of healing. So instead of having Hellstones that can help heal an ally, it's basically an on-demand PI whenever you want it. A Bloodstone that your allies can also utilize, which is kind of interesting. 30% haste increase is pretty valuable because it increases the casting speed of all of your abilities, but also a variety of other effects like your dot ticks and a variety of different components. Haste is generally a good stat, and it's something that a lot of players do try to stack with in PvP if they can, especially if they play a caster. But now if you use the Warlock Hellstone, which doesn't seem to function fully, which it looks like the Bloodstone right now isn't actually functional. No matter how many times I try to use it, it doesn't actually do anything, at least as of this moment. But I imagine like an on-demand PI for 12 seconds, actually stronger than PI, 30% haste. It's like an on-demand Bloodlust. Might be pretty good. It definitely gives Warlocks a bit of an alternative ways to support their allies, either through Warlock Hellstones, which generally on their own are fairly strong as just a self-heal ability, but now you can utilize it as a big burst of damage and or healing with all that haste, which could also be very strong as well. And the final class to get some brand new PvP changes is the Warrior, with them getting some of the best and some of the most exciting talents ever. First one being Berserker's Roar, which replaces your Berserker's Shout, where you literally go berserk, still removing and granting you immunity to fear, sap, and incapacitation effects, so exactly the same, not changing the ability's cooldown, but also reducing the duration of the next crowd control effect on the Warrior within 15 seconds by 50%, not only in the Warrior, but also group members within 40 yards. So you can use this in order to prevent your healer from sitting in a freezing trap for a little bit too long, or a cyclone potentially, or use it in order to make sure that next time the mage lands a polymorph on you, it doesn't last as long, so you can disrupt the rotation. And this is a 1-minute CD ability. This could have so much potential in the future. I almost am surprised that they're adding this in the game. I almost wouldn't be surprised if they maybe try to remove this at some point in the future, or adjust it, or alter, or heavily nerf it. This seems very good to try to disrupt some crowd control. It could be very valuable in a group setting. Another ability Warriors are getting that's also incredibly fun is Dragon Charge, not only a prop warrior talent, now available for Arms and Fury, so all 3 specs gonna use this charge ability instead of a heroic leap to barrel down through all the enemy targets, which allows you to run at high speeds, knocking all enemies away, dealing physical damage to them, but kind of does make you a little bit more uncontrollable during that time. They did adjust the way that the ability works, so now you can actually pivot left and right as you use the ability. Normally we just charge in a straight line, but when I use it here and I turn, you can actually see there's a little bit more movement with it. You can actually get around areas a little bit easier. So that is very good and pretty easy to use. And it also does have a significant bit of a knockback, so it can give Warriors quite a potential to maybe use this in certain maps to displace enemies in disadvantageous positions and maybe even single them out with your team jumping them and locking them down, but this could be a nice way to clear the room. Lastly, for Arms Warriors, they're changing the way Sharpened Blade works. Normally, this would be a separate ability that you will apply, and then your next Mortal Strike would reduce the amount of healing an enemy would take by 50% for 4 seconds, but now they're making it so that after you use abilities like Warbreaker or Colossus Smash, then your next Mortal Strike is going to, for free, apply the Sharpened Blade buff to reduce the amount of healing an enemy takes, which I guess works out if you're trying to get yourself the most amount of save the most amount of globals while trying to get the most amount of damage on an enemy. That could be good in that regard specifically. So you are trading some of that control with Sharpened Blade when you want to use it, but you really get the convenience of saving a global or saving a keybind in order to be able to enable Sharpened Blade. I guess in most cases, warriors would want to use Sharpened Blade when they're trying to kill a target, so following up from a Colossus Smash into a Mortal Strike with Sharpened Blade makes sense. But I kind of also like the ability for you to have a little bit more flexibility with that Sharpened Blade and being able to turn it on a target at a moment's notice. This one is probably going to be okay as a change, but it does add a little bit more convenience for Arms Warriors either way. But as always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this video update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate that. Also, join our Discord community where we post pretty regularly regarding anything new regarding 11.1 PTR realms, as well as anything new that I find when exploring all of these classes a little bit more in depth. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Which PvP talent do you think stands out to you the most heading into patch 11.1, and which one do you think is not making its way to the live realms and will get deleted during the PTR development? Let me know your thoughts. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.